Hi, I'm Dr. Jim Porter, licensed psychotherapist. Today, I'm going to talk about how to take care of your anxiety, how to live with your anxiety, how to put up with your anxiety, and how to train your anxiety responses. I'm using the metaphor or the title, the concept of bringing anxiety into the room. And I'm going to explain why your anxiety is so hard to control. And I'm going to use the example of a toddler, and pretty soon you'll understand what I mean by bring anxiety into the room. So, how is the best way to train toddlers? Well, toddlers are known for tantrum, and we're using your anxiety responses as sort of tantrums. We feel certain ways and then we go crazy, or internally we feel like we're going crazy, screaming, yelling, kicking on the floor. The toddler example is a great way to do this if you think of yourself as the parent and all these reactions as your toddler. They were trained in you from a very early time, and some of them are evolutionarily implanted. So when you want to train a toddler to do things, you might want to whack the kid if they're doing something wrong. There are so many problems with doing that besides the fact that it's cruel. It backfires on you eventually because you're trying to teach the kid to be aversive to whatever they did by whacking them. But what you really wind up doing is training them to be aversive of you. And some of you right now are understanding why some of it's not working for you and how come the relationship between you and your kid is so bad. But we're only using the toddler right now to talk about you, the part of you that gets anxious and goes crazy. So when you're trying to teach a toddler, when you're trying to train a toddler, you can very much guarantee that a lot of their behavior is trying to get you to do exactly what they want. And if you don't do exactly what they want, then they go negative. They freak out on the floor. And the concept there is that you're going to try to extinguish this tantrum. The way you extinguish any behavior is you refuse to reward it. So you can assume that a lot of your anxiety was actually rewarded by obedience in the past. So your anxiety, let's say, told you to do something like stop doing something scary or start doing something right now to get rid of this anxious feeling. And if you did it, you rewarded that anxiety response. Are you starting to get it? The same with a toddler. If a toddler asks for a cookie and you say, I'm sorry, but I can't give you a cookie, that toddler is going to have a tantrum. And what you're going to do if you want to do the right thing is you're not going to give the toddler what they want. You're not necessarily going to punish the toddler. You're not going to smack them around and everything. In as much as possible, you're going to let that toddler have their tantrum until they realize that it's not working on you. And you're going to have to do this over the course of several tantrums over and over again until they suddenly realize tantrums just don't work and basically give up on them. Now, if you have tried this and then stopped somewhere in the middle, here's the pattern you've probably noticed with a toddler, and you can take this and apply it to your anxiety responses. The toddler is throwing a tantrum. You decide to ignore them. The tantrum gets worse because the toddler has decided to get very aggressive with you, screaming louder, hitting, whatever. So eventually you give in. Guess what you have just rewarded? You've just rewarded the worst response. And that's called shaping extremely bad behavior. And that's why some people grow up to be aggressive. The same reason why your anxiety response might be off the charts. Your anxiety response might have gotten you into legal trouble, might have gotten you extreme problems at work. It might have gotten you an extremely pronounced anxiety, bizarre response that you quite don't understand in yourself. So here's the reason that you need to bring anxiety into the room. When you're dealing with a toddler and you just throw them in another room, you can't teach them because you're not there. You don't know what they're learning by throwing them in a room. That's the same with suppressing your anxiety. You are just throwing them into a room, into their own wild kingdom to learn what they want to do. So that's your anxiety, right? You want to bring your anxiety into the room. So what does that mean? If you think not feeling your anxiety is going to help you deal with your anxiety, that's not going to work. You're not going to learn how to deal with it. You're not going to learn how to remain control and refuse to reward the anxiety. And your anxiety is not going to learn any lesson you're trying to teach it. So it's going to bang on that door. It's going to break holes in that door. And that anxiety is going to find ways to come out and when you're least expecting it. Okay, so you really can't lock up anxiety. You can only pretend to lock up anxiety. So that's the toddler example, and that's why we're going to think of the metaphor of allowing. You've got to be in the same room with anxiety if you're going to teach it. So for survival reasons, though, our anxious brain has been there for a reason. It's basically always looking for the tiniest clue that you might be about to die. And there's usually nothing in the real world nowadays deadly to find. So your anxiety response is necessary, but hardly ever really practically important to have at any pronounced degree. But it's there because we've been trained that way and because of evolution. So that part of the brain produces automatic feelings and behavior. That's why you can be looking at your own feelings and behavior and saying, I have no idea why I feel this way or why I'm acting this way. Meanwhile, your anxious mind will then try to fill your conscious mind with reasons that you should feel this way and must act this way in a way of trying to get you to act a way like a toddler wants you to do something, or it wants you to feel this way because your anxious mind thinks you should be afraid and you must do something to act on that danger. In a short time, your more discerning brain is decreased in activity and awareness, and your consciousness is filled with the content created by your anxious brain. Basically, most of our lives, we've been exercising our impulsive, anxious brain. And so our conscious brain that's allowed to pause and thinks and knows how to act like the parent brain, has not been exercised. So the solution is not simply to shut down the anxious brain and only use the conscious brain. The solution is to bring online your conscious discerning brain while your anxious brain is still awake. This is so that they can have a conversation, so that your discerning brain can make final decisions, and so that your discerning brain can teach the anxious brain. It's a very simple to explain process. You're going to have to hear explanations all over again and over again until you really get it, because it's hard to remember when you're trying to do it. This process, though, retrains the brain to make these episodes of panic and experiences of anxiety quiet down more, happen less often, and drop off more quickly. Then anxiety just becomes a feeling that doesn't truly bother you, control you, or stop you. However, it will still be there to get you out of trouble in the rare event that there is a true danger. Again, danger is rare. So you can't teach your anxiety system unless it's in the room. What that means is that you have to feel anxiety to be able to do anything to change it. Let me repeat that. You have to feel anxiety to be able to do anything to change it. So don't think about eradicating all anxiety and fear and anger. These are all brothers and sisters. Anxiety, fear, and anger, think of them as basically the same thing. Most of my anger management clients are really showing anxiety that looks scary, and some of them get aggressive. So, in a way, you need to hope for the anxiety to come up so you can teach it its next lesson. Or you can try to make the anxiety show up to class. Thank you. Focusing on anxiety triggers can be a good way to bring up your anxiety. Something in your mind or in your memory or in your environment that brings up your anxiety, actually intentionally bring it up for yourself and focus on it. Look at something that is anxiety producing, imagine anxiety producing scenarios, anger producing scenarios, all that. Actually dive right into them and put yourself right there. It's also a good method for teaching your anxiety if you can bring it up. In that situation, you are telling it with your, so when focusing on a trigger also teaches your anxiety about that trigger. In that situation, you're telling it with your actions that you are not afraid of the anxiety trigger, and that the anxiety cannot make you stop focusing on the trigger. So you see the two lessons. One is, I'm looking right at that trigger, anxiety. Right, anxiety? Are you paying attention to me? I'm looking at that trigger. See, it's not scary. No trigger will kill me, right? And you're also teaching that anxiety that no matter what it says or does, it can't make you look away from the trigger. So the problem is that if you stop engaging that trigger while your anxiety is telling you to stop engaging the trigger, then you will have rewarded the anxiety for trying to control, therefore increasing your anxiety's disruptiveness. You knew that. We said that earlier, but you can't stare at the trigger forever, and sometimes it's lasting a very long time, and you need to stop. So you'll want something else as your reason to stop focusing on the trigger. This will help you shape and plan how you're going to intervene on your triggers and on your anxiety. So one example of some other reason to stop focusing on your trigger, besides that the anxiety is so big, is you could be only stop focusing on the trigger when the anxiety subsides, right? Let's get that out of the way. That's an important thing. A lot of people will do that. They will just pay attention to their anxiety trigger until it rises and falls. But that way your system knows that you outlasted the anxiety and that the trigger was not really scary or dangerous. But when you can't do that, you have to set up something artificial. So another thing you can do is set a timer to signal the end of focusing on your trigger, to let your body mind know that you're not responding to the anxiety, you're only responding to your own choice to stop after a predetermined time. Set a timer. So both of these reasons that I just mentioned to stop engaging the trigger teach your body that your anxiety is futile in making you engage in avoidance or protective behaviors when you are not really in danger. They also teach your anxious body mind that ignoring your anxiety's commands didn't kill either of you. That way your anxiety will realize it doesn't need to alarm you as often or as potently or for such prolonged times. So, with that specific trigger, your anxiety will disrupt you less often, more mildly, and for shorter moments. Then you can do this with a lot of other triggers. Real life triggers and imaginary triggers. An important point is that this training is not intended to completely get rid of all your potential for anger and fear. Your fear and anger responses will continue to operate correctly in emergencies, but won't operate without good reason after repeated self-teachings. Your fear and anger response is appropriate sometimes. Again, anger is not a bad emotion. There's no such thing as a bad emotion, just uncomfortable and comfortable, and calm versus excited. That's it. Those are really the only categories of emotions. If you've ever instantaneously leapt out of danger from an oncoming car, you've experienced appropriate fear. If you've ever had to physically defend yourself against immediate aggression, you've experienced appropriate anger. If you've ever busted through a door to get out of a burning building or anything like that, you've also then experienced probably appropriate anger. Although, interestingly, you may not remember the emotion itself during those situations. A lot of times we're acting unconsciously of our emotions. And this could be all day long we're acting unconsciously of emotions. That's why we have to bring the emotions into the room to be able to deal with them. If you didn't call up your anxiety, but it arrives anyway, right? So this is an unplanned opportunity for intervention. You're just doing your day, maybe you're laying on the couch thinking you're calming down, but all of a sudden you get freaked out. So it arrives anyway, you'll likely be in a state of mind that doesn't support positive problem solving, right? But you have to be ready for those potential accidental teaching moments. So the anxious mind thinks of problems and doesn't realize that you're simply experiencing an uncomfortable thought, an uncomfortable body state. So it assumes there's a danger and conjures up images in those moments. All day long, it's basically trying to do that to you. And it conjures up behaviors intended to make you see danger and act to eradicate it, right? So it's got a habit of when you're calming down or randomly to think of dangers and think of things you need to do, right? In that situation, you may not be exactly always ready. So you need something concrete. So one thing you can do is have a prepared statement that's like on a business card sized piece of paper tucked into your wallet or somewhere nearby that you can always access. And you're getting into a state and you're like wondering what I need to do. And all you need to do is remember, I have this piece of paper with something on it. So you have to have a prepared statement of the truth handy for those situations in a form that you can make it difficult for your mind to ignore the truth that you knew in your calmer state. So write down a statement about your anxiety and anger and how elusive it is and what you should be doing to calm yourself down on a little tiny piece of paper that you can keep in your pocket or somewhere handy. And then you'll have that to pull out. That's very concrete. But if you have enough presence of mind from practicing what I've been teaching you today, you may not need a little card like that. You'll be anxious and you'll say, wait a minute, what am I supposed to do? Right now, I'm supposed to just pay attention to my anxiety and not obey it as long as it takes, or for the count of 100 breaths, or some arbitrary reason to stop. After a while, that other spontaneous anxiety response will learn that it is unnecessary, that itself is not necessary, and it will learn not to appear as much. So you can be afraid or angry and not have it control your behavior. That means that fear doesn't actually make you stop from asking that nice person out on a date. And it doesn't make you stay in your home or not touch that beautiful garden snake because, they're not going to hurt you. Or go after that job you really want because that's not really going to hurt you. Surprise, surprise, really. It makes it means that the neurological connection between your fear and automatically triggered behaviors like avoidance, screaming at someone, staying home all the time, gluing yourself to books or social media, talking small talk instead of standing up for yourself or expressing yourself or being open and honest. Um, it just means that the connection between your anxiety and those type of poor coping mechanisms will start to separate. Um, and there's this hologram of automatically triggered thoughts that are tied neurologically to your anxiety feelings. That tie will start to be cut. You can actually be afraid, even shaking, sweating, and stammering, and do that scary thing, and you will be just as effective as if you were not afraid most of the time. So again, I'm saying when you're scared and you go to do that thing, give that speech, ask that person out on a date, you're going to be just as effective even if you are freakishly scared. Most of the time, to the other person, you're going to look just as effective. You might even look endearing and cute. Then you become less afraid by doing exactly what makes you afraid. And this can be done in steps for some things. And for some things, it can be done all at once. Doing it in steps is called systematic desensitization. Doing it all at once is called flooding. Try to get to know yourself to realize what's best for you. Consult a professional if you think you need one, and often it's just better to have someone guide you from the outside. I admit that I myself have made the mistake of being too excited about who I've become over who I used to be. Like a much more scared, safe, limiting person. I've gotten basically arrogant about this, but still sometimes I realize that I need some help from a friend, from a very close loved one, or even from a professional. But the bigger truth is that kind of scared kid's actions of trying to do things that didn't feel comfortable to him um, made me the person I am now. So, this concept of being emotionally free and never having uncomfortable emotions or never succumbing to their influence is an illusion. We've all been there, and we'll all probably do it again here and there. So, also get rid of the stigma. Embrace those emotions that you think are wrong or bad or evil or wimpy or scary or embarrassing. Okay? So, I think it makes some sense to say that that little kid in me was braver than I am now, right? Even though it's easier for me to do many things now than it was for him then. But it's specifically because this little kid, see, now I'm talking about that toddler again, this inner toddler. That toddler suffered through all those attempts, um, through somewhat crippling fear and anger. Um, and because that inner toddler did those all those years, things are easier for me now. I'm stronger now because I suffered when I was younger and didn't know how to deal with all these things. So metaphorically, that toddler of mine, he was brave, and I have it easier than he did. So I think that's the end of it, but I want to give you sort of an example of that little piece of paper that you might put in your wallet. So you can make a card that says, this is only a panic attack, or this is only anxiety, and carry it with you everywhere you go. And you pull it out whenever you're panicked or anxious and just stare at it. Even better, for some people, read the words aloud over and over again, as long as you can, or for as long as your panic lasts. So again, the two main ways to deal with anxiety, one of them is not to get rid of your anxiety and put it out of mind, out of sight, and to quash it down. No, your anxiety needs to be there to work on it. So you can intentionally bring your anxiety into the room by focusing on triggers or doing things that scare you. And then you'll be able to get used to your anxiety if and only if you refuse to obey your anxiety until you choose to go back to normal. And then another way to do it is when your anxiety comes on spontaneously and you have no idea what to do, have a little sort of crutch, a little thing in your wallet that tells you what to do, that tells you to stay calm and don't do anything until your anxiety subsides, that tells you that your panic is only panic, that it's only anxiety. Remember, no emotions are bad, no feelings can hurt you. They are facts, but they are not deadly, ever.